The night swallowed sound. Not slowly, not gently, it took it all at once, as if someone had shut a massive door over the world. Even the cicadas along Route 41 fell silent. Their endless summer rhythm cut clean in half. The only thing left moving was the wind dragging dust across the cracked asphalt and the faint ticking of cooling metal. A 1957 Oldsmobile rested sideways in the ditch, its front end buried in weeds and bent guardrail. One headlight was still glowing weakly, flickering like a dying eye. The windshield had shattered outward, not inward. A strange detail, but no one would notice that yet. Deputy Harold Finch arrived first. His cruiser's tires crunching gravel far too loudly for a scene that felt like a grave. He stepped out slowly, one hand resting on his holster out of habit, though there was nothing alive in sight. "Jesus," he murmured. The driver's door hung open. Inside, a man in his early 40s lay slumped across the steering wheel. His shirt was damp with sweat, his face pale and oddly calm. Lips slightly parted as if frozen mid-breath. There was blood on his temple, but not nearly enough to explain death. Finch leaned closer. No smell of alcohol. No skid marks long enough to suggest panic braking. The dashboard clock was stopped at 11:47 p.m. The ambulance arrived 10 minutes later. The medics worked quickly. But their faces told the truth before their mouths did. "He's gone," one of them said quietly. "Heart, maybe, or shock." They pulled the body free and laid it on the stretcher. His wallet identified him as Ellis Rourke, a regional sales representative for a glass supply distributor. Married, 2 kids, address 40 miles north. Another accident, another name for the ledger. Except accidents usually made sense. The state trooper who arrived later noticed the windshield fracture pattern and frowned. "That glass didn't collapse from impact," he said. "Looks like it was stressed before the crash." Finch shrugged. "Maybe it was old, or defective." The trooper nodded, unconvinced but tired. Paperwork always softened curiosity. They never noticed the faint boot prints near the tall grass, already fading beneath the windblown dust. They never questioned why the glove compartment was empty while the trunk was perfectly organized. They didn't see the thin strip of photographic film caught briefly in the weeds before the breeze carried it deeper into the darkness. And none of them saw the woman standing on the hill a quarter-mile away, her silhouette barely separating from the black sky. She lowered the camera slowly, listening to the echo of sirens fade down the highway. The wind tugged at her coat and lifted a strand of dark hair across her face. Her breath was steady, calm, measured. The shot was clean. The angle perfect. She rewound the film with a soft mechanical hum, the sound almost intimate in the quiet night. The road below returned to stillness, as if nothing had ever happened there at all. She did not linger. The woman turned, walking back toward her parked car hidden beyond the tree line, already cataloging the image in her mind: position of the body, fracture of glass, reflection of light on twisted chrome. Every detail mattered. This was not art. This was record. The Oldsmobile would be towed before dawn. The weeds would be flattened by boots and tires. The air would forget the shape of the scream that never happened. But the photograph would remain. And so would the pattern. By morning, Ellis Rourke would be another tragic statistic. A tired salesman who drove too late and died too fast. His children would be told their father's heart had failed him on a lonely road. His wife would blame the highway, the darkness, fate. No one would blame intention. Not yet. Because this was only the first silence. Maribel Crossland DeLuca had learned early that attention was dangerous. In her childhood home on the outskirts of Stockton, California, noise attracted discipline, questions attracted suspicion, and emotion attracted correction. Her father, Giancarlo DeLuca, an Italian machinist with a permanent crease between his eyebrows, believed silence was a form of respect. Her mother, Isabella Crossland, a Chilean immigrant who worked as a studio photographer, believed silence was a form of observation. Maribel inherited both. She spoke little, watched constantly, and remembered everything. The camera entered her life before toys did. At 6, she learned how to hold it steady. At 8, how to measure light. At 10, how to develop film in the red-lit bathroom her mother converted into a darkroom. Faces, shadows, cracked sidewalks, broken windows, nothing escaped her patience. People thought she was shy. She was not. She simply found human behavior predictable once you removed the noise. By the time she finished high school in 1958, Maribel had no interest in college. She preferred systems, machinery, patterns. She moved east for factory work and eventually landed a position as a night quality inspector at the Riverbend Auto Glass plant in northern Illinois. The job required precision, consistency, and long hours alone among conveyor belts and glowing furnaces. It suited her perfectly. During the day, she supplemented her income as a contract photographer for insurance companies, documenting accident damage, structural failures, and product defects. She learned how companies evaluated liability, how reports were phrased, how certain words softened responsibility while others hardened blame. Most people never read fine print. Maribel memorized it. Her apartment reflected the same discipline. Everything had its place. Shoes aligned perfectly. Dishes washed immediately. A filing cabinet labeled in neat block handwriting. Routes, materials, weather, glass behavior. The folders were not connected, not yet, but they were growing. Her social life was non-existent by design. Co-workers described her as polite but distant. Men occasionally invited her for coffee. She declined without explanation. Intimacy disrupted clarity. At night, she walked. Not for exercise, for mapping. She memorized alleyways, industrial roads, intersections where light failed, stretches of highway where police response was slow. She learned which gas stations kept cameras running and which ones never bothered to repair them. She listened to radio traffic when she could, learning patterns of patrol movement. Control was not domination. Control was predictability. The first thought of death had not come as rage or trauma. It came as a question. What happens when you introduce a variable so small no one notices, but so precise it reshapes the outcome completely? She had been photographing a warehouse accident in late spring of 1966. A forklift operator had lost control on a ramp. The pallet shattered. Glass sheets collapsed like ice. The final report blamed mechanical failure and human fatigue. No one questioned the timeline, the placement of safety wedges, the way the glass had fractured outward instead of inward. Maribel had questioned it. She recreated the sequence mentally for weeks afterward. The realization was not frightening. It was elegant. Her notebooks became more deliberate after that. She began timing traffic flow on rural highways, studying how heat affected laminated glass stress, learning how dehydration, exhaustion, and mild stimulant exposure affected cardiac rhythm. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. Subtlety was safer than force. The night Ellis Rourke died, Maribel had already rehearsed the sequence in her mind dozens of times. She had known his route from delivery logs. She had known the age of his windshield from distributor records. She had known exactly where fatigue would overtake caution. She had not touched him. She had touched circumstances. Standing in the darkness with the camera pressed to her face, she did not feel excitement or guilt. Only confirmation. The system worked. Back in her apartment, she developed the film carefully, hanging the negatives in perfect alignment. The image emerged slowly. Twisted metal, angled headlight glow, the stillness of a body frozen mid-moment. She studied the photograph like an engineer studies a blueprint. No trace of her presence. No anomaly visible to casual inspection. The world had accepted the version she offered it. That was the real satisfaction. Not death. Authority over sequence. And now that the question had been answered, a second question followed naturally. How many variations could the system tolerate before someone noticed the pattern? The second death arrived without drama. A freight dispatcher named Roland Hemsley collapsed inside a loading office in Joliet on a humid August afternoon. The coroner ruled it a sudden cardiac event complicated by dehydration and heat stress. The building's ventilation system had malfunctioned earlier that day, and no one questioned the coincidence. Maribel had. She had inspected the cracked safety glass in that office 2 weeks earlier for an insurance report. The defect had been minor, invisible to anyone who didn't know how stress fractures propagated under vibration and temperature change. She had noted the resonance frequency of the nearby rail line. She had adjusted a single mounting screw during the inspection, leaving the frame just unstable enough to amplify micro vibrations into an almost inaudible pressure pulse inside the sealed room. Not enough to kill, enough to exhaust, enough to accelerate failure. She photographed the aftermath again, this time pretending to be nothing more than a quiet contractor documenting damage claims. No one questioned her presence. They rarely did. The third death followed in October. Clarence Morrow, a traveling appliance salesman, died when his motel shower glass exploded outward at dawn. The shards lacerated his legs and neck. The police ruled it a manufacturing defect triggered by temperature shock. The motel owner blamed the supplier. The supplier blamed transport damage. Maribel collected the fragments personally. She had visited the motel 3 nights earlier posing as a late traveler. She had learned which rooms still carried older tempered panels. She had measured the plumbing delay time and water temperature rise. The failure point had been mathematical, not emotional. 3 deaths, 3 different scenes, 3 different causes. No visible pattern. Yet by November, something shifted. A young deputy in Will County noticed a detail while filing reports. The same insurance photography contractor appeared in 2 separate accident folders. The name was not unusual. The coincidence might have ended there if not for a third appearance in an archived highway crash file. The files landed on the desk of Detective Alistair Keene, a methodical investigator known for patience rather than instinct. Keene disliked coincidences. He disliked repetition even more. He began quietly pulling reports. Highway accident. Warehouse collapse. Motel glass failure. Different counties. Different jurisdictions. Same photographer. Same brand of incident documentation style. Same meticulous framing. Keene did not accuse. He observed. While Keene built timelines, Maribel prepared the 4th variation, a suburban garage incident involving a carbon monoxide buildup amplified by altered ventilation flow. The victim, Edwin Plaskett, never felt the air change. He simply sat down and never stood up again. That death triggered the threshold. 4 unusual fatalities in 11 months. 4 insurance-linked scenes. 4 appearances by the same contractor within unusually tight windows. A task force was formed quietly, avoiding public panic. Keene requested background checks. Maribel Crossland DeLuca, 31 years old, no criminal history, stable employment, no family nearby, no close social ties. Too clean. They subpoenaed her insurance archives. That was the first mistake she hadn't anticipated. The photographs told a story she had underestimated. Not of guilt, of proximity. Her lens captured angles no insurance adjuster required. Reflections that included partial silhouettes. Shadows aligning across different scenes with the same camera height and stance. Keene recognized intentional consistency. Surveillance began. Maribel felt it on the third night. A car that followed too carefully. Footsteps that paused when she paused. A delayed echo in routine patterns. The system was no longer predictable. She accelerated her schedule. Her 5th design was rushed. An industrial stairwell failure using loosened anchors and timed shift traffic. But a maintenance worker discovered the instability hours before the intended window. The near miss changed everything. The maintenance log listed a recent inspection signature. Maribel's. Keene moved immediately. A warrant followed. They entered her apartment at dawn. The filing cabinet was still there. Neat, labeled, orderly. Inside they found undeveloped film rolls. Cross-referenced route maps, weather logs, glass stress calculations, personal items from multiple victims. A motel keychain, a torn invoice fragment. A dented cigarette case recovered from a crash site. The architecture of intent became visible. Maribel was arrested without resistance at the factory floor, her gloves still clean. Her expression neutral. She said nothing in the patrol car. She didn't need to. The evidence had learned how to speak. Maribel Crossland DeLuca did not request a lawyer immediately. She sat in the interrogation room with her hands folded neatly on the metal table. Eyes focused on a faint scratch in the surface as if it were a coordinate on a map only she could see. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above her. The room smelled of stale coffee and paper. Detective Alistair Keene did not rush. He placed a folder between them. Inside were enlarged photographs taken from her apartment, negatives, route diagrams, stress calculations. Handwritten timelines. "You're not careless," Keene said calmly. "Careless people leave fingerprints. You left architecture." Maribel lifted her eyes for the first time. "Architecture implies intention," she replied. Her voice was steady, measured. "Patterns exist whether people choose to acknowledge them or not." Keene slid another photograph forward, a composite comparison of multiple accident scenes. Shadows aligned, camera height matched, lens angle identical. Then explain why your shadows keep appearing where people die. Silence stretched, not defensive, contemplative. "I never touched them," Maribel said finally. "You won't find violence in my hands. Only correction." The interrogation continued for hours. She offered no emotional reaction, no denial, no confession in the traditional sense. Instead, she spoke of systems, failure tolerances, probability windows. Human life entered her vocabulary only as a variable within environmental equations. Keene understood then. This was not hatred. This was ownership. The trial began in March of 1970. Press coverage labeled her the glass engineer killer. The public struggled to comprehend a murderer without weapons, rage, or spectacle. Jurors listened as forensic engineers reconstructed stress fractures, airflow manipulation, vibration resonance, and structural fatigue. Insurance experts testified how documentation patterns linked her to every scene. Photographic analysts demonstrated how the same lens imperfections appeared across all crime images. Former co-workers described her precision, her isolation, her unnerving calm. The defense attempted to frame coincidence and professional overlap. But the physical evidence was relentless. Film rolls containing undocumented scenes, victims' personal items preserved as reference artifacts, handwritten calculations predicting failure windows. The architecture stood. When Maribel took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. "I did not kill people," she said plainly. "I removed margins of safety. The world completed the rest." Gasps rippled through the benches. "I wanted to know how little interference was required to redirect fate. It was never about them." The jury deliberated less than 6 hours. Guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder. Sentence: death. She accepted it without visible response. In the weeks that followed, Keene visited her once at Stateville Prison. He wanted to understand whether anything human remained beneath the machinery of her logic. "Do you regret it?" he asked through the glass. Maribel considered the question carefully. "Regret assumes error," she replied. "The model functioned as expected. And the lives? They were parameters," she said quietly. "Not outcomes." Keene left with no comfort in his conclusions. Execution was scheduled for late autumn. On the final morning, Maribel requested one item: her camera. It was denied. Instead, she was allowed a pencil and a single sheet of paper. She drew silently for nearly an hour, intersecting lines, angles, vectors converging toward a central point. A final map no one would ever decode. As the straps were fastened, her pulse remained steady. No fear, no prayer, only calculation. The switch was thrown. The room returned to silence. Months later, the highway where Ellis Rourke had died was resurfaced. New guardrails installed. Fresh asphalt erased old scars. Traffic resumed its endless flow. No one remembered the night the road went silent, except in archived evidence rooms, where carefully labeled photographs remained, frozen intersections of choice, physics, and consequence. Proof that control, once believed absolute, always leaves a trace. Even in silence.